She is mentally unfit to manage her own affairs, Your Honor. She is confused, erratic, and a danger to herself. My father didn't even blink as he said it. His voice was calm, almost gentle, the way people sound when they've practiced a lie until it feels natural on their tongue. He stood there in his tailored suit, shoulders slightly slumped, as if the weight of loving such a broken daughter had finally become too much to bear. He even wiped at his eye with a neatly folded handkerchief, forcing out a single trembling breath. Then he glanced toward the back of the courtroom. The audience he'd invited, aunts who hadn't spoken to me in years, cousins who only knew me through his stories, distant relatives who'd gladly accepted the narrative that something had always been off about me. They were seated neatly in the back rows, hands folded, faces set with anticipation. They weren't there for truth. They were there to watch me fall apart. I didn't scream. I didn't jump to my feet. I didn't shout that he was lying. I didn't even look angry. Instead, I lowered my eyes to my wrist and checked my watch. 3 minutes. That was all the time he had left before everything he'd built. His reputation, his control, his carefully curated image, collapsed in on itself. Be honest for a moment. Have you ever had someone look you directly in the eye and lie about you so convincingly that everyone else believed them? Not because they were mistaken, but because it benefited them. Because making you look unstable made them look like the hero. If you felt that, you know the ache. The way your chest tightens, the way your hands go cold, the way you realize that defending yourself emotionally would only make things worse. Walter sat back down, smoothing his tie as if he'd just delivered a heartfelt eulogy. The courtroom went quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy one, thick with judgment and expectation. I could feel eyes crawling over my skin, waiting for tears, waiting for rage, waiting for the breakdown. They were waiting for Rati, the 29-year-old disappointment, the family failure, the confused child, to finally snap and prove that everything my father had said was true. But I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just sat there, breathing slowly, feeling the worn wooden bench beneath my palms, listening to the hum of the air system in the old probate courtroom. I let the silence stretch. I let it grow uncomfortable. I let it sit there long enough that even my father's supporters started shifting in their seats. "Miss Rati," Judge Morrison finally said, peering over her glasses, "your father has made some very serious allegations regarding your mental capacity and your ability to manage the estate. Do you have a response?" Walter leaned forward slightly. It was subtle, but I saw it. The lean of a predator who smells blood. He needed me to react. He needed noise, anger, hysteria, tears. That was how he won arguments. That was how he controlled people. Emotional chaos was his currency. If I screamed, he won. If I cried, he won. If I begged, he won. So I gave him nothing. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my blazer. My movements were controlled, deliberate. I didn't look toward the gallery. I didn't look at the judge yet. I looked directly at my father. My face was blank, empty. No anger, no fear, no sadness. In psychology, they call this the gray rock method. You make yourself dull, uninteresting. You remove every emotional hook a narcissist feeds on. You starve them. But Walter didn't know that my silence wasn't confusion. It was calculation. "Miss Rati," the judge prompted again, her voice firmer this time. "I'm listening, Your Honor," I said evenly. "I'm just waiting for my father to finish listing his grievances. I wouldn't want to interrupt his performance." A flicker passed across his face. Just for a fraction of a second, the smirk slipped. He leaned toward his attorney, Stephen, and whispered something sharply. Stephen didn't smile back. He didn't look reassured. He looked tense. His fingers tapped rapidly against his legal pad, the pen clicking again and again. I recognized that habit. 3 months earlier, when I'd started tracking their filings and motions, I'd noticed Stephen did that whenever something didn't line up, when paperwork led somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Stephen knew something Walter didn't. He knew that documents leave trails. Walter, however, sat back, chest puffed out, basking in the image he'd been selling the family for years, the exhausted patriarch holding together a crumbling dynasty, the loyal father burdened with a difficult daughter. And I was the problem. The leak, the weakness. He thought he was minutes away from legal guardianship over me, from full access to the $5 million my grandmother had left behind, from total control. He thought he was winning. What settled into my chest wasn't fear or adrenaline. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, precise. The feeling you get when a trap finally clicks into place. Proceed, I said quietly, sitting back down. Let's hear the rest. Walter stood again, energized now, emboldened by my restraint. Look at her lifestyle, he sneered, gesturing toward me as if I were something unpleasant on the floor. She lives in a shoebox apartment in the worst part of town. She wears clothes from discount racks. She takes the bus because she can't afford a car. I gave her opportunity after opportunity, and she squandered every single one. He listed my so-called failures like items on a receipt. I let him talk. But my mind drifted backward. 2 years, to the day he showed up at my apartment without warning. 300 square feet, bare walls, a single window, books stacked neatly along one side. He'd looked around with open disgust. This is embarrassing, Rati, he'd said, nudging a stack of books with the toe of his expensive shoe. I tell my friends you're finding yourself, but we both know you're just failing. Then he'd left, climbing into his brand new Porsche Cayenne, slamming the door like punctuation. Later, I learned he'd leased that car using my social security number. What he never understood was that the shoebox was a choice. While he was buying $5,000 suits to impress people who barely tolerated him, I was building an invisible ledger. Quietly, patiently. Every time he called me worthless, I moved another $5,000 into an offshore investment account. Every time he mocked my boring data entry job, I was actually managing a $15 million portfolio for private equity clients who valued discretion over flash. I wasn't broke. I was hoarding. I wasn't failing. I was positioning. He thought I took the bus because I couldn't afford a car. In reality, I was Irving liquidity to buy the distressed mortgage note on his precious country club membership. When he laughed at my thrift store blazer, I was finalizing paperwork to acquire the shell company holding the lien on his office building. He saw a daughter who needed supervision. I saw a liability that needed liquidation. She has no concept of financial responsibility, Walter shouted, slamming his hand on the table. That's when I really saw him. Not as my father, as a parasite. Panicked, cornered, desperate. He didn't want a conservatorship because he loved me. He wanted it because he was drowning in debt, and I was the last life raft left. He wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to survive. And that realization stripped away every trace of guilt. If I had been just a daughter, I might have hesitated. I might have tried to save him. But I wasn't his daughter today. I was his creditor. And this wasn't a family dispute. It was the opening moments of a foreclosure. Is that all, Mr. Walter? Judge Morrison asked, her pen scratching sharply across her notepad. For a brief moment, Walter hesitated. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward the back of the courtroom, checking his audience. Then confidence rushed back into him like a drug. No, he said, straightening, not even close. He turned slightly and gave a small nod. Stephen stood up. The scrape of his chair against the courtroom floor sounded far louder than its shoe. LD have like metal dragged across bone. He didn't look at me as he rose. His eyes stayed fixed on the bench, his lips pressed into a thin, nervous line. Sweat glistened faintly at his temples. He walked forward and handed a thick stack of papers to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Morrison. Your Honor, Stephen said, clearing his throat. We are submitting financial records demonstrating severe mismanagement of the trust fund established by the late grandmother. Specifically, the primary disbursement account. Walter didn't wait for him to finish. She lost it, he barked, pointing directly at me. $750,000, $750,000, gone. And she didn't even notice. The courtroom reacted instantly. A collective gasp, a sharp intake of breath, a whisper rippling through the gallery like a shockwave. My aunt clutched her necklace as if it might fall apart. Two of my cousins leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. To them, that number wasn't just money, it was unimaginable wealth. To Walter, it was the only thing standing between him and total collapse. Explain, Judge Morrison said, already flipping through the pages. Look at the transfers, Walter shouted, abandoning any pretense of calm. 50,000 here, 80,000 there, all wired out over the last 24 months. All to shell companies, all untraceable. He turned toward the gallery, his voice rising theatrically. She filed no police report. TS. No fraud alerts, No complaints to the bank. Nothing. My own daughter is so mentally checked out, so detached from reality, that she let a thief drain her inheritance dry. He paused, letting the words sink in. If we don't step in now, he continued, lowering his voice into something almost tender, she'll be on the street in 6 months. I watched him perform. It was disturbingly effective. He wasn't just accusing me of incompetence. He was reframing his own theft as evidence of my mental instability. In his story, the missing money wasn't a crime. It was proof. Proof that I was unfit. Proof that he needed control. Proof that he was the hero. We are filing an emergency motion, Stephen added quickly, wiping sweat from his upper lip. We request immediate freezing of all assets and the appointment of Mr. Walter as temporary conservator to prevent further losses. Walter finally looked at me again. Not with concern, with triumph. He believed he had cornered me. He believed the missing money was the smoking gun that would end the hearing right there. He thought my silence meant ignorance, that my calm meant confusion. He didn't realize the money was gone by design. Miss Ratti, Judge Morrison said, her tone shifting, growing heavier. These records show a significant depletion of funds. Do you have an explanation for where this money went? The room fell silent, so quiet I could hear the hum of the lights overhead. Walter leaned back in his chair, crossing high arms, already savoring the victory. He was ready for me to stutter, ready for me to say I didn't know, ready for tears. I stood. I didn't look at my lawyer. I didn't look at my notes. I reached down and picked up a single blue folder that had been sitting on the table since the start of the hearing. I don't have an explanation, Your Honor, I said clearly. Walter's mouth curled into a smile. I have a map. That smile froze. I walked toward the bench, not rushing, not hesitating. Every step was deliberate, calm, measured, the kind of walk you take when you already know how the story ends. I placed the folder in front of Judge Morrison. My father is correct, I said, turning slightly so the gallery could hear me. The money is gone. $750,000 was transferred out of that trust. Walter couldn't help himself. She admits it. He laughed. She watched it happen and did nothing. That's not just negligence, that's catatonia. I wasn't catatonic, I said, cutting through him. I was patient. Judge Morrison opened the folder. Her expression changed instantly. What am I looking at? She asked. You're looking at the digital footprint of every unauthorized transfer, I explained. IP logs, device signatures, timestamps. I didn't just track the money, I tracked the machine that moved it. I pointed to the first page. Every single transaction originated from the same desktop computer, the same network, the same physical location. Judge Morrison looked up. Where? She asked. 442 Oakwood Drive, I said calmly. That is my father's home address, specifically his study. The color drained from Walter's face. He tried to stand, but Stephen grabbed his sleeve and yanked him back down, whispering something frantic in his ear. That's fabricated, Walter stammered. She hacked it. She made it up. I didn't even look at him. And here, I continued, flipping to the next page, are the wire confirmations. The funds weren't sent to random shell companies. They were sent to accounts held by Apex Consulting. Judge Morrison scanned the page. Apex Consulting is registered in Nevis, I added. 3 years ago. I turned my head and looked directly at Walter for the first time since standing. A company you incorporated using your mistress's maiden name. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts. Someone actually laughed in disbelief. My aunt covered her mouth. Walter opened his, but no sound came out. He looked like a man punched square in the chest. Judge Morrison raised her hand sharply. Order! Then she looked back at me. If you knew he was stealing from you, she asked slowly, why didn't you freeze the account? Why allow this to continue? This was the moment. The hinge everything turned on. Because of the law, Your Honor, I said. If I had stopped him at $50,000, it would have been a civil dispute. A family matter. He would have faced probation, maybe restitution, and then he'd be back in my life trying again. I let my eyes settle on Walter. I needed a pattern. I needed interstate transfers. I needed the amount to exceed $500,000. The courtroom was completely still. That constitutes federal wire fraud, I said. Racketeering. RICO. Stephen's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. The mandatory minimum sentence, I continued evenly, is 10 years. No parole. Walter slumped in his chair. He suddenly looked very small. I didn't lose $750,000, I said quietly. I spent it. I turned fully toward him. That was the price of your prison sentence. And for the first time in his life, Walter understood. He hadn't been stealing from a daughter. He had been walking deeper and deeper into a trap. Walter didn't collapse the way I expected. Cornered animals rarely do. For a few seconds he just sat there, chest heaving, eyes darting between the judge, the papers, and the gallery. Then something hardened behind his gaze. Desperation sharpened into calculation. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and slowly reached into his briefcase. I have proof, he said hoarsely. Proof she's lying. The room shifted again. Hope flickered across a few faces in the back rows. People wanted an out. They wanted this to be complicated. They wanted a reason not to believe what they were seeing. Walter pulled out a single sheet of paper, slightly yellowed, carefully preserved. She authorized every transfer, he said, voice gaining strength. She just forgot. He handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Morrison. This, Walter said, turning toward the gallery, confidence returning like a fever, is a power of attorney document, signed and notarized 2 years ago. It gives me full control over that specific trust account to manage family investments. Judge Morrison studied it carefully. The signature appears authentic, she said slowly. It is authentic, Walter said quickly. She signed it right after her grandmother died. She was overwhelmed, emotional. She begged me to take over. He turned back to the judge, shaking his head sadly. This proves my point, Your Honor. Her memory is fractured. She dissociates. She creates elaborate fantasies because she can't accept reality. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Even Stephen sat up straighter, a fragile hope lighting his eyes. Judge Morrison looked directly at me. Miss Ratti, is this your signature? I recognized the document instantly. 2 years ago. Funeral paperwork. Endless forms slid in front of me while I was still numb with grief. Walter standing beside me, guiding my hand, telling me not to worry, telling me he'd take care of everything. It looks like my signature, I said calmly. Walter pounced. She admits it. She doesn't remember signing legal documents. That alone proves she needs a guardian. I let him enjoy the moment, just one breath. Then I reach Ed into my bag and removed a second folder. That document gives you control of one account, I said evenly, placing it on the table. It doesn't give you somewhere to live. Judge Morrison frowned. Explain! I quietly purchased the commercial property that houses my father's law office, I said. He hasn't paid rent in 4 months. Eviction was filed this morning. Walter froze. I also acquired the mortgage note on his house, I continued. The one he refinanced 3 times without disclosing existing liens. The room went dead silent. I own your office, I said, looking directly at him. I own your home, I own your debt. Walter's mouth opened, then closed. His hands trembled. You came here to take guardianship, I said softly. You're leaving as my tenant. I slid a final document across the table toward him. A withdrawal of your motion, a signed confession acknowledging unauthorized transfers beyond the scope of the power of attorney. 30 days to vacate both properties. I leaned in slightly. Refuse and the locks are changed by noon. For the first time, Walter looked afraid. Not angry, not arrogant, small. He picked up the pen with shaking fingers and signed. As soon as the pen left the paper, the courtroom doors burst open. Federal marshals entered, followed by a woman in a navy suit carrying a sealed folder. Walter Ratti, she said, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, racketeering, and perjury. The power of attorney hadn't saved him. It had sealed the indictment. Stephen slumped back in his chair. My relatives stared in stunned silence as Walter was handcuffed and led away. No one defended him. No one spoke. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner. I finalized the sale of his house within the week. His office building followed shortly after. I deleted his number, blocked every contact, and walked away without looking back. Peace isn't something you're given. You take it, and sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting louder. It's letting them destroy themselves while you quietly hold the receipts.